Sorry, I tried to start the recording for those of you who aren't here. And I recorded it to the cloud, but I did that last time and I made that mistake and it was a pain in the ass to fix. So, hi everyone, I'm Ariana. It's so fun to see your guys' faces and to get to meet all of you. As you all probably know, I spend my free time posting on the internet about the bar exam. So, I'm a super fun person. Um, okay, so we are going to go through a property essay today. I know a lot of you have come to either MPT essays or MPT workshops of mine or essay workshops of mine. And a lot of my general tips are very similar, regardless of the type of essay, right? I am of the mindset that we want to follow the IRAC method. We want to go issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. And why is that, right? A lot of people will come here and or will tell you you want to do the CREAC method. You want to do conclusion first and then rule analysis, conclusion, or conclusion, issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. The reason that I recommend that you follow the IRAC method is because oftentimes students will get their conclusion wrong. And if the first thing the grader is seeing is wrong, you're priming them to assume that everything else on your page is incorrect. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm gonna go with yes. So obviously at the end of the day, as long as you have all of those components, does it really matter what order you go in? Like, not really, right? But I do like to give you all that recommendation because I think it's really easy to go the other way. And then I think that can lead to. So, did everyone get the copy of this document with the property question? Or actually, I'll also send it in the chat. That way you guys have it. I circulated it, but sometimes when I let people join, sometimes people register after I've already circulated it, and I don't want to spam all of you with like 13 emails. So for those of you who did not receive it, we are doing the February 2023 MEE question 5. It is a real property question. So let's get started here. The first thing that I always do with my essays is I read the call of the question. So I'm coming down here. In 2020, did Wendy acquire title by adverse possession to Central Acre? And then, assuming that Wendy acquired title by adverse possession to Central Acre in 2020, did she also acquire title to Western Acre in that year? Did she also acquire title to Eastern Acre in that year? Explain. Okay. So, based off of that, what can you all tell me about adverse possession? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and yap with me.
Open and notorious,
Open and notorious. What else?
continuous,
Continuous, hostile. Yep. What else?
Listen,
What'd you say? Oh, exclusive, actual exclusive. Good. There's like one key component we're kind of forgetting.
the statutory.
The statutory requirement. Good job, Brooke. Yes, we are missing the statutory requirement. Okay. What do we know about when we see lots, whenever we come to a property question, the first thing that I think to myself is, okay, I need to ensure that I'm drawing this shit out. I do this also with my multiple choice questions because when they start talking about West Acre, East Acre, like I get super lost. I'm a very visual learner. And so reading this on paper is very confusing to me. So I always draw things out. So what I do is I will get just like a piece of paper basically, and I will draw this out. So let's read it together. In 1991, Smith owned 3 acres of undeveloped parcel of land in state A. Okay. He validly subdivided the parcel into 2 lots. Both undeveloped lots remained in the Smith family until 2005 when John purchased them. The lot that comprised the western 2 acres, and Beth purchased a lot that comprised the eastern 1 acre. Both John and Beth promptly recorded their valid deeds. Okay. So what I'm doing on my paper is I'm going to draw a lot. It's literally just a rectangle. Then I'm going back up here. 3 acre undeveloped lot. Both undeveloped lots remained in the Smith family until 2005. Okay. Purchased the lot that comprised of the western 2 acres. So I am essentially, though this is not going to be like fully accurate in regard to the size because each lot is an acre, I do find it helpful to just draw a diagram. Can everyone see this? Right. So I know that the western part is 2 acres, the other side is 1 acre. Great. Okay. In 2009, one of the Smith decedents um purported to convey to Wendy by quitclaim deed. Okay. So we have Smith, John purchased the lot, the last two, Beth purchased, blah, 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 both John and okay. So I'm gonna put J's and B in. I'm gonna put a J in the two eastern or western lots and then B in the eastern lot. Okay. Smith's decedents purported to convey to Wendy by quitclaim deed the entire 3-acre parcel that had originally belonged to Smith. The quitclaim deed accurately described the 3-acre parcel. What do we know about quitclaim deeds? Anybody? You can put it in the chat or you can.
When you transfer via quick claim deed, there's no warranties. It's as is.
Okay. Anyone else? No covenants, least amount of protections. Good job. Great job, everybody. Okay. On January 1, 2010, Wendy began to occupy 1 acre of the 3 acres purportedly conveyed to her in 2009, specifically one of John's 2-acre lot. Okay. So we see Wendy is on one of John's acres. So we're going to diagram that out too. In 2016, John died survived by Mary, his 12-year-old daughter and sole heir. On March 1, 2022, Wendy brought a quiet title action against Mary and Beth, alleging ownership of all 3 acres by adverse possession. For the purposes of this action and to avoid confusion, the trial court labeled each acre of the original 3-acre parcel as follows: the western acre, which is the western half of the land described in John's deed, the central acre, which is the other half of the land described in John's deed, which Wendy has occupied, and the eastern acre, which is the land described in Beth's deed, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label my lots on my diagram: central, western, and eastern. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? No. Can you show my diagram? Yes, I can. Let me finish drawing it. I really want to figure out a way to be able to draw this stuff on my computer, but I'm not artsy enough for that, so I need a pen and paper. Maybe someday I'll figure that out. Okay, Eastern. Okay, so this is Beth. We have this is John, and this is Wendy. Okay. So with these property questions, things start to fall apart very quickly, right? So this is what my diagram looks like. I changed it a bit based on the fact that they relabeled those lots. Can you see this okay, everybody? Okay, I'm gonna hold it here for a second for people on Zoom. Or I guess you're all on Zoom for people who are watching the recording. Okay, so I'm gonna go back up here. Okay, 1901, 3 acres. Both undeveloped in the Smith family until 2005 when John purchased the lot that comprised of the two Western and Beth purchased it. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna write out a timeline, right? I'm gonna make a literal timeline like I would. Do you see this line? I don't know if you can even see it. That's annoying. But I'll do it and I'll show you. So I'm gonna put 1901 and then I'm gonna put a mark for 2005. And this is when John and Beth come into the picture. Okay. Then in 2009, one of Smith's decedents purported to convey to Wendy. So then that's when Wendy comes in the picture. Then in 2010, we have Wendy begins to occupy 1 acre of the 3-acre parcel purportedly conveyed to her in 2009, right? So now we know that this is when she comes in to actually be on the land in the central lot. Then we have 2016, John dies. Then 2022, and he gives it to Mary, right? Then we have Wendy, who brought a quiet title action against Mary and Beth. Okay. So this is what my diagram looks like in completion. Let me see if I can get this to look better for you guys. Okay. Can everyone see this? So on the bottom, we have my diagram of the lots. We have Eastern, Western, and Central. And then up at the top, we have the diagram of the timeline of what's happening. I think one of the biggest issues people have with property questions is they get super overwhelmed by all of the material and facts that they're telling you. Okay, so now the facts at trial established one, the quitclaim deed from Smith's decedent gave Wendy colorable title to the 3-acre parcel described in that deed. So I'm also going to write this down, right? So I'm going to draw a number 1. I'm going to put S, draw an arrow to Wendy. Then I'm going to draw number 2. It says from 2010 until 2021, Wendy possessed Central Acre. It was open, notorious, continuous, actual, exclusive, hostile, and under the claim of right. Okay. What do we think that's indicating?
That she had the adverse possession?
Mm-hmm. And then 3 is that Wendy ceased her actual possession of Central Acre on 1/1/2022. And then 4 is neither Western nor Eastern Acre ever had been possessed by any of its owners or by Wendy. The state's adverse possession law states that an action to recover title to or possession of real property shall be brought within 10 years after the cause of action accrues. However, if at any time the cause of action accrues, the person entitled to bring that action is under 18 years of age, such person, after the expiration of 10 years from that time the cause of action accrues, may bring the action to cover title or to recover title or possession within 5 years after reaching the age of 18. Why do you think this is important? What about the 18-year-old part of the statute is important for us to know about in this specific question?
The daughter was 12.
Yep, the daughter was 12, John's daughter, tolling. Yep. Okay, great. Good job, everybody.
That's the disability rule, right?
Yes, yep. So technically minors, like that aspect of it, they call it like the minority rule or like the disability rule because she's
Yeah,
not
'cause
a
it's like you're in jail too, right? I think there's like
of
a couple.
majority. Yeah, there's a couple of different examples.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for just like 1 second so I can also share my document with you guys. Okay. And then let me get this settled up. Okay. Now I'm gonna reshare my screen. If I am smart enough to figure this out. Okay. Now, can everyone see both the question and the Word document? Yes? Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so what is the issue for number 1?
Whether they have adverse possession, whether
Mm-hmm.
we acquire adverse possession.
Okay, so how would you word that?
Um, our bar prep professor was just like, just reuse what they're asking you. So the issue is whether in 2020, Wendy acquired title by adverse possession of Central.
Good job. Yes. Has anyone else heard of any other potential structures you can use for the issue statement? Or does anyone else have any other versions they prefer? Or do you mostly just flip the question, the call of the question?
Like adding in the specific topic or issue in there, I've heard too.
Yeah. So I think like a lot of people recommend that you add in extra things. My general consensus is that you do not want to do that because once again, like I said at the beginning of the this call, right? My fear is that if you get it wrong, if you focus on the wrong sub issue, if you word things in a way that they don't like, right, that can cause problems. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes. Okay. So I generally recommend that you just flip the call of the question. So I agree with David. And then we already talked about what the elements are for adverse possession. So we will say, in order to acquire title, by adverse possession must possess the land in a manner that is one, actual and exclusive, two, continuous, three, open and notorious, four, hostile and under claim of right, and five, for the statutory period. Okay, what other sub issues, if any, are there under this first one?
The statutory concern?
Okay, yep, statutory concern is one of them. What else? Somebody said it earlier in the chat.
Color of title?
Kind of. We want to talk about the tolling issue here as well, right? So if we go back up here, John died in 2016 and his 12-year-old daughter, right? So like we were talking about earlier. And the question is whether Wendy has actual title because she's acquired title through adverse possession. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Okay. So I would then probably underneath this, right? Then you're going to put your analysis here. Then we'll probably say that um uh another issue that must be analyzed is whether the statutory period was told due to Mary's age. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? I'm gonna assume yes, unless you say something.
Would you put it under the analysis? You wouldn't do like a separate.
I would realistically, if I were answering this question on the exam, I probably would make this an A.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Like
Yes, like a
this.
different issue.
Yeah, I would make it a sub issue like this, and then I would probably do B, and I would say, I'm trying to think of how I would word it probably. I would probably also say that, um, I may also separate out the continuity aspect of it for this, but realistically, I think you can just talk about all of that under the first issue. And this example, honestly, is a good one because it shows you that there are, in a lot of ways, actually different ways you can organize this, right? To me, the biggest issue or sub issue with this particular one is the tolling, right? Because you can talk about the concerns with continuousness in the analysis of the adverse possession, right? But the question is whether or not the statutory period was told due to the disability and or the age of Mary. And so where another thing that I would also include here is that I would probably say that like and then I would say that right. So if I didn't separate out the continuity aspect of it too, I would also talk about this of like who gets the title and what type of title do they obtain. So would you now under the subheading make a quick IRAC? Yep. So then underneath here, right? Then I would do rule, analysis, and then like a mini conclusion. And then I would honestly put the full conclusion for this big part under here. So when you have, even with like this second part, right, I'm going to do a full IRAC for A and B, but then at the very end, I'm going to say in conclusion, um, like we don't know yet what the outcome is, right? But in conclusion, Wendy did not acquire title to Western Acre, but she did acquire title to Eastern Acre, right? I would do that to wrap up the full issue underneath this. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes? Okay, great. Okay, what is the rule about tolling?
The rule is that whenever there's a minor, the statute of limitation stops. Whenever somebody's in prison, the statute of limitation stops. Whenever the somebody is medically incapacitated, the statute of limitation stops until they're able to fully, be over the age of 18, or they've been released from prison, or they have been medically released and capable of making their own decisions again.
Yep, good job. So if you have time, right, you could list out all of those things, but here we can also just focus on that small issue of the fact that this individual is a minor and that when does the disability get removed? It gets removed when she reaches the age of majority. Okay. Okay. Wonderful work. Okay. And then the other thing I would also say here is under what is the state name? Does they tell us? Whatever the state is. Oh, under this state's adverse possession rule, um, an action must be brought within 10 years. However, if the statute is told, the person who is under 18 is entitled to bring their action after the expiration of the 10-year from the time the cause of action accrues. Accrues.
Can I ask you a quick question? I just want to
Yep.
make sure I'm understanding. Like I understand the rule and everything. I just want to make sure. So basically, you're saying that once she reaches the age of 18, they're saying that's when the statutory timing would start tolling again?
Yes. And they
Okay.
basically get 5 years from the date of her turning 18.
Okay.
Does that make sense? And the only
So she
reason
would
we
have
know
to bring
that,
the action against, oh yeah, it says right there. She would have to bring the action against Wendy within those 5 years to say that she doesn't have possession to the property.
right.
Okay.
And like if you look at this, right, he died in 2016, but she was 12. So when does she turn 18?
2024,
Okay.
right?
When are they bringing this?
No, 2020, 2022. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm bad at math. I was like, yeah, you're right. 100%, 2024. If that makes you feel any better.
A
But
little
we know
tired.
it's not 2020, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So at the end of the day, what we're going to realize here very quickly is that like she basically, there's a chance that Mary could come in and take possession 5 years after she turns 18. Does that make sense?
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Um, has she had actual and exclusive control of the central acre? Yes, because she lives there. Okay. Anyone else have any other thoughts?
I mean, it says that facts establish that.
Yep. Okay. So what I would say then is basically that Wendy However, then I would say there are potential, um, I would say like you could say concerns, issues, um, potential impediments between her ability to possess it, right? Because we have this issue as it pertains to disability with Mary. What other concerns do we have? It starts with a T, another T word. Anyone? Tacking. Yes. Can someone tell me what tacking is?
I think it is the amount of time that it's transferred to somebody else, from someone who had been under adverse possession.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. So essentially, then what I would say, however, there are potential concerns, including one, Mary was of the age of minority, and then I would say, and two, I would say that Wendy essentially, because when we look back at our question, right, when did Wendy essentially stop possession of Central Acre?
21.
Yes. Good job. Okay. Does this make sense? And the way that we know this, right, is because it says it right here. Okay. Good work, everyone. Now, then from here, right, then I would go into this issue analysis, rule analysis conclusion as it pertains to the tolling of the statutory period. And then I would also go into a sub issue of the tacking. So I would say the issue is whether, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Anyone have any creative thoughts on how to phrase the tacking issue? No one? I'm going to say the adverse statutory period ran successive with others. Or I'm going to say the issue is whether the principle of tacking applies to Wendy's adverse possession. Okay. We already did the issue. We already talked about the rule for tacking, right? And so what we want to do is underneath here, go and say, um,
Where does the tacking fall into this though? I'm just a little bit confused on that.
what do you mean?
Like where, because she bought in 2010, right?
Yeah. So basically, the argument is that okay, so John had a cause of action to
Hmm.
recover, right, for 6 years before 2010.
Hmm.
Then Mary has essentially had a cause of action for 4 years.
Okay.
And so the tacking more so has to do with whether Mary and John's potential interest in Central Acre means that those 2 years combine to make 10. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But what we're going to ultimately come to the conclusion of, right, is that, yeah, Mary, technically, like we said earlier, right, there is this idea that Wendy has had possession of Central Acre for 10 years, right? But then we go back to this idea of Mary being of the age of minority. And
Okay.
so that disability means that those 4 years that she could have brought the cause of action do not tack onto John's, meaning that once Mary reaches the age of majority, i.e., 18, there are still 5 years for her to be able to bring it. And we know that she brings it in 20, that she turns 18 in 2022.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So maybe
Yeah.
maybe a better way to organize this for everyone is to do this instead. Just put this here, right? Because even though Mary could have brought it for 6 years, does this make sense to everybody? Okay. Does anyone have any questions? I feel like I need to pause. No one has any questions at all? Okay, deal. Okay. Um, Jesus. And I think the confusing part with this too is that usually when we talk about tacking, we think of it more so. Is there another way that tacking could have been phrased? Let me think about that for a second. Hang on.
Isn't it usually on the I remember just like
Usually
doing on
it's
the
the
adverse
opposite.
possession. Yeah, that's why I think we're getting confused.
Yeah, so usually it's the opposite, right? So we're thinking about normally what would happen in this situation is you would essentially have Wendy would have maybe had possession for like 4 years, and then Wendy's daughter would have possession. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So that's part of it, right? But for this specific one, it's the opposite, right? Which is confusing because neither of them had a cause of action for 10 years against Wendy, but because Mary has inherited Central Acre, that means that those two can aggregate and there has been a 10-year period. So this part of the reason why this particular issue is really tricky is the fact that generally when you think about tacking, you're thinking about the person that is adversely possessing the property, right? So for example, if like Wendy had a, friend or and someone like then she had a will, right? Or if Wendy had a child or a parent and they were adversely possessing Central Acre. And then Central Acre got passed to Wendy and she began to continuously hold possession of it. That is generally the context in which tacking would occur. Does that make sense to everybody? So yeah, Brooke, it probably the reason it's confusing is because it's the inverse of how it normally is done, but you can tack on either side. Okay. Okay. So the rule here is that um whether the adverse possession, the time period for bringing an action against a wrongdoer in possession is determined by so this is another rule where I would honestly plug this into your outline under the tacking aspect. Does that make sense? Because this is basically the inverse of how normally we talk about tacking. Okay. There's a couple comments. I don't remember tacking. I cannot think of another word they would use for tacking. It is because John has heirs and that title was passed and John had possession, but now Mary has possession. Okay, and then Darby says, so Wendy can keep the time she already established prior to John's death and add that to the years after Mary is 18. No. We're saying, well, yes, kind of. That's kind of what we're saying, right? But we know, so for example, maybe this will be helpful. If Mary was 18 at the time John died, okay, let's say Mary was 18 at the time John died, then yes, Wendy could combine the time she had already established prior to John's death and then add it to the years of Mary being over the age of 18, right? However, in this particular issue, she was not of the age of 18. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Okay. Um, okay, great.
Hmm.
Okay. But, right, the concept is tolling in common law in other states. Here, tolling applies only if the person who had a cause of action when the adverse possessor first entered the land at issue was a minor. Okay. So we've finished up with this tacking principle. And essentially, what we're going to see here is I'm going to go through this and kind of just bullet point it so you all have it. For the analysis, one of the things we want to discuss is the fact that John knew about Wendy adversely possessing the property from what did our timeline say? For
2010.
yep, from 2010 until he died, right? So that's 6 years. Okay. Then we have the fact that then we have Mary, right? Even though minor, and she knew about it from 2016 to 2020. So theoretically, if there is not an issue with the statutory period and the period tolling, then Wendy would have adversely possessed it because that totals to 10 years. Okay. Now, one of the other rules, right? We've already written out this rule. Okay. But one of the things that's really important as it pertains to this rule and the rule over here is that generally under adverse possession, if Mary had always, let's say that Wendy started to adversely possess Central Acre after John had died and when Mary was 12, right? Then the entire time, Mary is the only one that can bring a cause of action. And that means that Mary's disability makes it so the statute would toll. But here, who could have brought a cause of action against Wendy for title of this property?
Dawn.
John, correct. And so he was the one. Did John have the ability to bring a cause of action against Wendy when he was still alive for 6 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so essentially, right, the other rule that's important to this is the fact that tolling only applies if the person had a cause of action when the adverse possessor first wrongfully enters the land was a minor. So because Mary was a minor and she acquired the cause of action, right, it means that the 10 years were still running the entire time. Okay, this one is a very fucking confusing question. That's part of the reason why I chose it because I think adverse possession is tested so often. And they oftentimes try to throw in these like disability minor examples, but it's really important that we know this concept of the fact that tolling only applies, right, if the person is a minor the entire time. So let me come up here. Okay, I have a question. By the time that Wendy claimed quiet title, Mary was 18, so she would have 5 more years. Since there is nothing in the fact pattern saying she claimed title, should I do the second issue based on the fact that she did not claim title of cause of action? Um, I'm a little bit confused about your question, if I'm being super honest with you. Are you talking about this second question, Sarah?
No, I'm talking about the first one still.
Okay, explain it to me. Can you explain your question?
I didn't put this issue
Which one, the tacking
you
or the
know,
tolling?
the tacking.
Okay, that's
But
fine.
I think I think I understand a little bit from what you say now because
Okay.
since it stopped.
Okay. So, yes, this is another reason why I chose this question because oftentimes with property questions, there's like a lot of shit going on and it's kind of overwhelming and it gets really confusing, right? And that's kind of why I tried to outline the sub issues before I dove into writing out the answer. And in reality, right, if you forgot this issue about tolling, this is making you more confused. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, if you're taking UBE, you should have scratch paper because you'll get a physical booklet of your thing, of your questions. If you're taking next gen, you won't have essays, so you don't need to be here. Um, so okay, let me re-explain this part of the question. We talk about adverse possession, right? And we know that it's continuous and it's clear and all of these things. But then we have this issue of her being 18, right? And we can tell that they want us to talk about the fact that she's of the age of minority. Okay. So we want to talk about the fact that just because if there are ever two people that are owners of the property at the same time that someone is adversely possessing property, you need to talk about tacking to show that two different people have had a total of 10 years to bring the claim against the person who is adversely possessing the property. Okay. The only reason that we brought up this statute, the statutory period, is because of Mary being a minor, right? And at the end of the day, we want to talk about the minor. We want to talk about the fact that there is a statute discussing minors. But then we also want to come to the conclusion, right, that just because she was a minor does not mean that the statute told. Does that make sense to everybody or no? I know this one's confusing. Alyssa, can you hop on and ask your question and make sure that that makes sense?
Yeah. No.
It doesn't make sense?
No.
Okay,
No, it does not make sense to me. I need like the connection of like,
explain to me.
okay, so overall we're talking about adverse possession.
Correct.
Great. Fine, dandy. But then I'm think I'm losing the purpose of what the I think where I'm getting confused is we're going over each analysis before we go over like each conclusion. So I'm not sure how we're getting from one thing to the next thing.
I see what you're saying. This might help. So was a bad question to pick. I thought it would be helpful because it gives you like subtopics about adverse possession, but the organization of this one's like a little bit chaotic. So what I would do for this one, right, is I would put a brief conclusion and I would just say, under the facts provided, Wendy has adversely possessed Central Acre. However, the two remaining issues exist, right? And then I would go into tacking, okay? And here, what we would say for the conclusion is that Wendy is able to tack together John's 6-year notice of adverse possession with Mary's 4-year notice of adverse possession. However, Mary is currently a minor, which may result in the statute tolling. Then down here, we're going to say the statute did not toll because John was of the age of majority when Wendy began to adversely possess Central Acre. And the full conclusion for this entire thing, after all of that, is that Wendy acquired title in 2020. Does that make sense? Does that make more sense?
Mm-hmm.
Alyssa,
Yeah.
does that make more sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
My brain like needed it to
No,
flow.
I'm glad you said something. I hope that that answered everyone's question, at least on that regard. Okay. Okay. So the cause of action accrues at the time the adverse possession enters. Yes, correct. Ariana.
Okay, so just quickly, so for the tolling part, if Wendy had started adversely possessing
Mhm.
when Mary was 12, and we forget about John,
Yep.
then it would toll until she was 18, and then the statutory limit would start to run.
Yep.
However, because John had a cause of action previously and was of the age of majority,
Mhm.
then it doesn't toll even though that was only for a 6 year period that there's a cause of action, and the rest of the 4 years for adverse possession was when Mary was a minor.
Correct.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question too? Is
Please, please, I
I
would love as many
I'm
questions as you have.
I'm just getting is I know it says that this is this state's adverse possession law. So is that I don't remember seeing that typically, like the law what we learned. I just want
They
to make
don't,
sure that
they do not normally give you the law with
yeah,
adverse possession. They expect you to know it. And this
right.
is why I chose this adverse possession essay because there are a shit ton. It's one of the most tested property issues. 9 times out of 10, this is all you will need is
Yeah.
that Wendy, had actual and exclusive, continuous, open and notorious, hostile under the claim of right and for the statutory period, right? Most of the time, you'll just put this rule and then come down here and say, it's clear that Wendy had actual possession because, it's clear that she had exclusive possession because, it's clear that she had because, right? But this question is weird because they say that to us.
Yeah. I actually pulled this one last night looking at it before you sent it, and I was like so confused. So I was like
Yeah, like
glad
I
that
picked this one because it's confusing.
yeah. But just I just want to make sure like that's not the typical law, right? The state adverse possession law provides that paragraph. I don't remember seeing that.
This is not typical and they don't normally give you
Yeah.
this.
Okay.
This is not
But
from the
that's
statute.
not the law that we need to know, right? Because I
Correct.
just don't, all right, okay.
This, anytime they say the state's adverse possession law provides that, or like the state's, homicide or the
Yeah.
state's whatever, that is only the state that they are referring to. You most often see this in like crim law, crim pro, or
I think some con law I've seen a little bit.
yeah, con law is another one, right? Because they're going to ask you like, is this
Like a
statute
state
constitutional?
statute. Yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, great. Does anyone else? Okay, yes. I I basically got into this because I was worried about time, which I should have been because we didn't finish the essay. But um normally what I would do in this situation, so I'm gonna make this blank, I would do the issue is whether acquired title by adverse possession. Then what I would do normally on my paper is I go like this. I delete the heading where it says like rule analysis conclusion, but I do this so that way I make sure that I break everything out. Then, as I'm writing out the answer to this, I would have realized that I probably want to break out the tacking and the tolling issues into sub issues. But technically, you don't have to do that, right? You could just do issue, rule, analysis, rule, analysis, rule, analysis, conclusion. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay. What other questions do you have? We're not going to get to the rest of this essay, but I can give you like an overview of where we would have gone with it, right? So, under this second issue, right, we want to talk about, can we get a copy of the sample answer from before? Yeah, this is a hard one with the sub issues, right? This one sucks, which is part of the reason why I picked it. And here's the thing, right? If you get an essay like this on the exam and you take 30 minutes to get through like this part of it, and all of a sudden you look up at the clock and you're like, fuck, go to the next question. You will come back if you have time, but we do not want to spend 45 minutes to an hour. Um, Yeah, this is also one that you can save until the end, right? You don't want to spend 45 minutes or an hour on this essay and then miss an opportunity. Oftentimes, what I recommend is go into the exam with two no-goes. Okay. My no-goes are, I should probably think about that actually. Con law and probably torts, honestly, which is embarrassing. So if I see a con law or a torts essay, I skip it. Like I'm coming back to it. I just know for me it's not good. I love property. I love civil procedure. So like for me, I would rather do those first. But I would go into the exam with like kind of like a two essay topics where you're like, if this is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, like I'm not doing it first. Right. So you can skip it and move forward. Also, when you see that an essay is taking up the entire page with the prompt, that's another good indicator that we should save this one for later, right? Because if you look at the other essays in this, okay, this one's also really long. They're really just giving you guys long questions. Okay, all of these are fucking long. Never mind. But some of them are a lot shorter, right? Or like I'm seeing this one Civ Pro. For me, I know that's going to be an easier one to get through faster. At the end of the day, the place that you're going to pick up the most points is the issue, well, is the rule and the analysis, right? And so the goal, if you don't have time, is to get one of those down for every sub issue, whether it's the rule or the analysis. But also, if you don't have time for this, odds are no one else has time for it, which means the scale is going to be very helpful. Does that make sense? Sorry, this was chaotic, but I hope it was helpful to some extent. What
Hmm.
other questions do you all have? So, for example, on this essay, if you did not talk about, let's say you got all of the second and third issues completely right, like these big issues down here. Let's say you got all of those right, okay? And let's say you didn't talk about tacking or you didn't talk about tolling, right? You could still get a 4 on this. So if you miss sub issues entirely, that doesn't necessarily mean the essay score will be low. And with the scale, right, odds are most people who did this essay missed these issues entirely. Like no one probably talked about them. And so what probably happened is most people talked about adverse possession and said that Wendy did adversely possess. That means you had the right issue, the right rule, and the right conclusion. We just did not have a good analysis and we missed some rules. Then if you got these two parts correct, right, then that means that you got a lot of points. Um, do I keep the mini conclusion in there? I would for this particular essay. Okay. So I think for me, I struggle the most with remembering to add facts to my analysis. And then Mallory asks if we can go through the general steps. So the general steps is I read the call of the question. So for this one, for example, do the federal rules of civil procedure permit the woman to bring the company into the action as a third party defendant? So what I do from there is I literally will come over to my paper and I will say, one, okay. Then I write rule, analysis, conclusion. Then I would do this and I would say, assuming that the Okay. So I basically write out my issues, write out my rule analysis conclusion, like headings. I'd come over, read the entire question. Then I would put my rules down for the first issue, write my analysis, write my conclusion, put my rule down for the second issue, write my analysis, write my conclusion. That's how I structure this 9 times out of 10. I should have demonstrated that in the way that I did the property essay, but I knew that that one was going to be chaotic. So I was trying to get through stuff too quickly. That is how I always do it. I don't outline more than this, and I don't start writing out a ton of shit when I'm doing it. When I am reading an essay, I do diagram to some extent on the paper, like I do, like I said, with this question where like I was literally drawing out these properties, right? But I also do my method where like I'll draw like brackets around certain things and I'll circle certain things. I have a code in my own mind that makes sense, right? So for me, I bracket around the parties and what they're claiming. I circle things that are key elements. And I put stars next to facts that I want to make sure I jot down. Some of my friends will do things where if it's a fact they want to include in the first, under the first issue, they'll put a number 1 next to it. And if it's a fact they want to include in the second issue, they'll put a number 2 next to it. And that can be a really helpful tool. As it pertains to the structure of your analysis sentences for the most part should follow this structure. Here, fact, because, rule. Or here, rule, because, fact. So for example, here the doctor was negligent because, or maybe not rule is a bad standard, is maybe a better way. Here the doctor was negligent because he left a sponge in the patient. Sometimes I read people's analysis, and their analysis is either like 6 sentences of fact, where you're just basically reciting for me whatever the question says, or you're just regurgitating the rules. And so I want you to think to yourself, how many sentences in my analysis use the word because? And it should be at least every other, right? You need to have a lot of sentences because they're assuming that you don't know anything. So you want to make the connection from A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E abundantly clear. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
Okay. Wonderful.
Sorry, how many did you say?
How many of what
For
did
the
I say?
because you said every.
Like every other sentence-ish, right? And it might not be in actually every other sentence, but let's say you have 5 sentences in your analysis. I want like at least 2 or 3 to have the word because in it.
Got it.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Wonderful. Does anyone else have any questions? You also all know where to find me. You can text me, you can email me, you can DM me. Yes.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I just had a quick question.
Okay.
Where on NCB do you find the questions? I'm on the website, I'm not able to figure. Do I have to make an account and then do this?
For like the free ones,
Yeah.
you should just really go to NCBE MEE bar exam and then go to learn about the MEE. Oh no, that's wrong. Practice question.
Yeah, it's
I know it's on here. Just give me a second. Preparing for the MEE. Here's a bunch of samples. You also can go to the New York Bar Examiner's website and the Texas Bar Examiner's website.
okay.
Also, your Barbary book, they have an extra book if you're doing Barbary that says like additional testing resources. You can
Okay.
use to have a bunch of extra essays and gradings and stuff. Okay, wonderful. Well, I will see you all later. Keep me posted. If you need anything, you know where to find me. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.